Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you are listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
So, I'm going to call this episode, we're finally finishing John chapter 7. We typically don't get locked in like this, but there are passages, and 8 will be similar in next week's episode, that John is unique. Like these things only show up in John. And this has been a really interesting process. This started with Jesus' brothers saying, hey, are you going to the festival? And chiding him because they did not believe. And then conversations both with the crowd and his own disciples, teachers of the law, and aspects of identity and claims about his identity that he's making himself equal to God. And so in the last episode, up in the previous verses before John 7:45, they had sent some soldiers out. The Pharisees did, the chief priests and Pharisees sent these soldiers out, these guards out, to arrest them. So these are Jewish guards, to whatever degree that's relevant. And so they sent them, and so we're going to see the aftermath. We know the guards arrived. If you haven't read ahead, then we don't know exactly what their fate was. Anything else we need to be thinking about? I've taken all the low-hanging fruit, at least, Connor.
You took it all. I'm just going to starve on the malnourished apples at the top of the canopy. Anyways, it is super quick. Maybe we'll touch on it more next week. We are going to go all the way to 53, and maybe I'll set up the conversation next week to just say we'll kind of talk about if you're reading along with us, you'll see a note in the Bible about 53, and then going forward not being in the earliest manuscripts that we have for John. And Jason and I have thoughts about that because, of course, we have thoughts about it. We have a podcast, so we have thoughts about everything. But if that is Jason and I had a conversation beforehand, and we have a very high opinion of our average listener to think that, whether you know about this or don't, you have the ability to think through this, to hold the tension, and hopefully hold it till next week, where maybe we'll have a little bit more of a conversation around the manuscript issue, or we won't. I don't know. Maybe just a quick blow by. But we do want to acknowledge the footnote in almost certainly all your Bibles. But we are going to go to 53 and then go on into John 8, where there is some controversy, which is very odd for the Bible. Usually it's a very uncontroversial book, yeah, where there are no issues.
We all agree.
And that's why. And that's why we're doing this, because we all just like to say we agree and go forward.
Creating the echo chamber of our dreams. And so as we process this, you'll notice, like Connor was saying, that dynamic of manuscript evidence and what is in the Bible and out of the Bible, it's usually beyond the scope of what we talk about. But it is interesting. And like I guess the thing I want to say here is, if you ever have questions, observations, comments, please let us know. We don't talk about that much, but let us know. Many of you know us personally anyway, so just text us. But if you need to find us, I assume there's somebody who can find us. I don't know. I don't know anything about anything technical. One of the funniest questions I get is when people say, hey, Jason, I'm going to start a podcast. Can I meet with you and figure it out? And I'm like, oh, are you going to be the guy that just answers the questions and says whatever's on mind, or are you going to be the guy that does all the work? Well, that's Connor's business.
Well, I've got a lot of expertise. Yeah, you've got a lot of expertise in a certain realm. But if you do want to get in touch with us, every episode in the podcast description, there's a little link that you can send us a note. In fact, I'm going to see exactly what it says right now.
This is amazing.
Yeah, it just says send us a text in the podcast description, and for most of your podcasting apps, if you just click on that, it will take you to your messages and be able to send us a message, and we can respond to that, which I don't think I've ever actually put that out there. I just assumed if people read the description of the episode, they would see that and assume it was not some weird thing. But now that it's official, you can either you can text us that way. I do think it'd be funny if, like, we had a family member, instead of texting us our actual phone numbers, texted this set up weird number. What's for dinner? What are we?
Right. Nobody ever asked me that.
When's your dentist appointment next week? And we will give deep theological reasoning for our decision on that. So, Jason, you're going to kick us off in 45.
John 7, verse 45. Finally, the temple guards went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, "Why didn't you bring him in?" "No one ever spoke the way this man does," the guards replied. "You mean he has deceived you also?" the Pharisees retorted. "Have any of the rulers or of the Pharisees believed in him? No. But this mob that knows nothing of the law, there's a curse on them." Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus earlier and who was one of their own number, asked, "Does our law condemn a man without first hearing him to find out what he has been doing?" They replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Look into it, and you will find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee." Then they all went home. All right. So, interesting. We made a claim at the very beginning of this run through. We're always looking over Jesus' shoulder. This is one of those departures because it kind of finishes the bookend. Sure. So Jesus isn't present in this, but like in anything in the Gospels, he's part of the discussion. So I am curious, what amazes you about this interaction between these guards and the leaders?
So this might be some confirmation bias for how I already view life, or view God and the Bible and how Jesus is working. But maybe it's just because I'm right, and that is the confirmation, and it's all okay.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Thank you. I'm glad. I need more confirmation. Send us a text too. No, I'm just kidding. But so when the guards say no one has ever spoke the way this man does, I think it's amazing that Jesus comes and the people that see him right, that catch a glimpse of him, that actually kind of are getting what he is putting down in a given situation. I'm not saying they get it overall or they understand all the implications, but the people that are pausing and actually listening to Jesus and hearing him and have a chance at grasping onto him, they're the kind of people that are like, man, I don't know. Like, he just sounded different. He was like, there was something off. There was something cool. There was something unique. There was something weird about him that just drew me to him. And the people that miss Jesus so often are the ones who are like, well, actually, when you look at the Bible, Galilee is just, it's too far. And if I look at my own life, it is so easy to see myself in the Pharisee. Like, well, God couldn't have been in that because, and then I have detailed theological reasons of why God couldn't be doing what this person said he was doing or in a certain situation. And yet I just know in my own life, there's a certain this rings so true to me to be like, man, can I explain to you how and why and the exact reasoning for why God showed up in this way, in this place, or even give you the book, chapter, and verse of why we can actually 100% directly attribute what happened to God. Oftentimes I can't, but all I can say is like, that moment felt like Jesus. It was weird. It was something I never experienced. And I felt a deep inner thrum in my being that felt me connect to God. And I'm putting more words into the guard's mouth than what they're saying, but I think that feeling of recognizing that deep inner thrum that is that connection, the presence of God. I think it starts with that. I don't know what's going on here, but that was different. That's more and different than things I've experienced before.
Yeah, I'm drawn to that too. I would think that is what amazes me, is this dynamic of these men have a job. Now, I don't know the level of fear a guard would have versus a Roman guard, like a Jewish guard versus a Roman guard. Like, my assumption is a Roman guard knows the guy above them wouldn't hesitate to kill him. Now Romans had rights, so it's part of my bias, which may be wrong. But I would think that if you're a guard, I have served as a guard before, there's fear in not doing what you're told to do explicitly, and they don't say this is like the worst indictment on yourself. Not to say, man, the crowds were thick or we couldn't do it because he was protected, or like literally saying what will most upset them, that there's some validity to this man's existence when they are there for the express purpose of arresting him because there is no validity to what he's doing. So by saying the truth, and I to me, it's more obvious true when you don't have anything to gain, you know, and them saying, man, we've never heard anything like this before, which that right there, that's a part I think we miss in our generation of knowing Jesus. Well, all the generations that know Jesus primarily through the Bible versus know him firsthand or even secondhand from a person that knew him. And I'm not suggesting that makes this somehow artificial or less valid, because Jesus himself and then Peter in his sermon, you know, this message is for those today and those that are far off, you know, so I think we count our Christianity is just legitimate. But oftentimes the voice I place on Scripture is the voice of the first preacher I had, or maybe my mom's voice or my dad's voice, and that is so subconscious. But I have interacted with enough people that they will look at a verse that's positive, and I'll ask them about it, and they'll be like, that's so negative, because of the person that taught them that truth in the beginning. Now, I'm not going on a tirade against those people and how we need to be faithful and more humble, but I am saying to hear it from Jesus does matter.
Yeah.
So then it means how it like lowers my respect to some degree with the disciples, and specifically the apostles who are hearing it all the time. And maybe not lower my respect, but just show how are they not just blown away with everything he says, because they get to a point where they question, you know. But I think certainly to the unexposed, and that's still true today, if you've heard something a lot, no matter how great it is, it becomes familiar. And they would too. But yeah, that idea of if you go to Jesus, and I think this is still true today, just in a different way, but if you go to Jesus and you're just willing to listen, like you don't have to be predisposed to believe in him, but if you go to listen, you're going to hear something different. Now, you can also choose to not hear. And of course, he references people that have ears, but they don't hear. That dynamic is still true.
Sure.
Is that, and I think something that is important for us always to say is, if you're reaching to someone on behalf of Christ and man, they just don't hear you, that's not a signal that, man, you're just not doing this well. You know, it's very likely that they are predisposed against you.
Sure.
You know.
Well, and we don't have an example of this. And then there was a great conversion of the temple guard, and they abandoned their post and, you know, went forward. And so there is always the opposite, the call that Jesus makes on us is not just to hear like a great sermon and then be moved by it. Like it's a call for so much more than that, but also recognizing for all we know, this could have been the start. This could have been, you know, who knows to say there was a temple guard that heard this and then later on was a part of the rounding up of Jesus on the night that he was to be the day he was supposed to be crucified, and then we don't know the story of these people's lives going forward. But what you said something towards the beginning that I think is so incredibly important to draw out, and it's also just the nature of the upside down kingdom, where if they had come back to the oh my goodness,
Pharisees,
to the Pharisees,
yeah.
yes. So if they had come back to the
priests.
Pharisees and the chief priests and said, "Listen, we're guards. We know crowds. We know how these things can turn. On our expert opinion, arresting this guy right now would just be the crowd. It would turn into a mob. It wouldn't work out.
Right.
That goes along with the way of the world. And like maybe the Pharisees are mad about it, and they're like, well, no, like we told you to do something. You know, we have authority to do it. But there would be a certain sense of like, well, this is their area. They know what it is. But the guards come back and tell the Pharisees, hey, that the reason they didn't do this is because in the guards' minds, the thing the Pharisees are experts in, the guards are not hearing in the same way. And so I just love this inversion of the upside down kingdom, where one, the guards are honest about it, which is like, you know, hey, kudos to those guys.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot easier to just be like, crowd was out of control, not going to work. You know, if it is.
You should do it at night.
Do it at night.
Maybe in a garden.
Maybe in a garden, you know, some I don't know. But I do have to give them a lot of credit for that. And then also to be able to be like, I mean, this is the nature of the kingdom, to say the areas where where the world is telling us, no, the areas where we are most common to defer to the experts, Jesus is coming in and inverting those areas and giving the message to the people that you least expected. Like, you wouldn't think that the thugs, the brute force, the muscle would be the ones that would be drawn in some way by the message of Jesus. You would think the people that are most ready to receive the message of Jesus would be the Pharisees, wouldn't be the people that are saturated in the Torah, and it's all that they think about, all that they live. But at least in this interaction, the experts, the people that are experts in what Jesus is talking about, or what Jesus is trying to get to, become the muscle, become the thugs, become the ones who aren't supposed to think, and the blind ones are the ones that are the so-called experts, and that's just like, that's so Jesus-y.
Yeah, I think it's just very challenging. I have been blessed by the Chosen to, I've had some really good teachers in my life, and I'm really grateful that they would make Scripture come alive and come to life, and in particular the Gospels, Jesus' interaction with people. And the Chosen is just another layer of that, of just thinking about watching people, while they're doing what they're doing. And this is one. And I've thrown Nicodemus in, and I'll give him some credit for at least saying something. He's not claiming, hey, this is the Christ. Hey, guards, the reason that you felt that way is because it's true. No one has ever spoke like him. He didn't do that. He, unlike the guards, stays in his lane and tries to reason in a way that the Pharisees would.
Yeah.
And yet, they obviously, they disregard him. It's not they don't like punish him. They're not like, hey, you're out of the group. There's no sense of that throughout Scripture, despite what Nicodemus does do. But it is interesting. That's a good contrast between the guards' response, who are just pure wonder, and he is like calculated and trying to slip in some rationale.
That is really helpful. And it's also a good reminder that the Pharisees are so closed off that neither one of those penetrate in any sort of way.
Right.
Like, for them, well-reasoned theological debate, there is no room for them to move off their positions or to change their mind in any way. And also, their hearts are so hardened that they have no ability to take in any outside experience. And I think that can be really instructive for how we view how we can experience God moving in our day and age. And I think a lot of us can become so calcified to the way that we think God is going to move, that other people's experiences can no longer factor into how we view God. And then I think a lot of times, I think we're coming into a day and age where the church is really good at not being the Pharisee with the guard, with the we're getting into a better place of not. I don't know. Maybe we're not. I keep thinking, I was like, maybe we're getting into a better place.
See, in my circles we are.
Yeah.
But I still hear of people being shut down dramatically just because they think a little bit differently than their local church. And so I'm like, well, are we better? I don't know.
It is hard to say, and it could just be a pendulum that swings back and forth. But I do think if it's possible to struggle with both of these, and I think all of us are going to struggle with at least one of these at a time. And so maybe it's instructive to just think, to be thinking, I'm thinking in my life now, okay, am I more closed off to the emotional, to the stories of God moving in somebody's life, or am I more closed off to the truth of Scripture that could help be revealed to me by somebody else? That would move me off my priors.
Yeah, so that leads to my I'm in a noisy chair today, sorry. That leads to my perplexion, is the idea that how does this, I guess my question is, and this application, as most of my perplexing questions are, it's how do you process this? So this comes from a story. My son and I were talking earlier today about health and wealth gospel. He had brought up some aspect, and we were talking about it. And so I brought up the example of Oral Roberts out at out at ORU, out at Oral Roberts University, and this was 30 years ago now or more. But he at one point said he had a vision from God. This preacher had a vision from God, and he had to raise like $8 million or something, or $2 million. I don't know what it was, to build these towers to God, and it'll be the
Cityplex Towers.
Yeah, well, it's now the Cityplex Towers.
Something else.
Yeah, because they went bankrupt after they built them, and then they had to be bought by somebody else.
By the way, if you've ever been to the top of those things, those elevators are janky. I was just up there
careful.
A month or two ago, and the elevators didn't work, and I was in like the 52nd floor, and I had to go down one floor at a time. And I will never go up there again. That's horrifying.
So there you go. There's the eyewitness account there. So these big, if you're ever in Tulsa, there's big towers out on 91st Street.
Yeah,
91st Street.
It's south. It's not downtown. Yeah. It's the only skyscrapers you'll see that are not.
That's true. That's
downtown.
true.
Yeah.
So, but he said he had a vision that if he didn't raise the money, God would take his life, or not spare his life, or however he framed it. And I remember this. I mean, we lived in North Carolina or somewhere else. And I remember hearing these stories.
I'll never go to Tulsa. There must be something real weird in the water there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and now I live here. Anyway, and so I'm talking to him, and then I'm like, it hits me. I can't say for sure God didn't tell him to do that. Mm-hmm. I just can't. I can't be honest and have integrity, and just like the way it was handled, I think was shifty. I have some judgments about things. I'm trying to think, no other spiritual leader that I know of has said I have to raise this money.
Yeah.
I have a lot of other questions about this guy's integrity and televangelists in general. The point here isn't about them, though. I'm not trying to say they're all good. Uh-huh. What I'm saying is I absolutely can't say for sure God would never, ever tell you that, because, for example, God told a guy to build a boat because he's going to murder everybody. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh man, there are battle or preparation of battles in the Old Testament where kings will not call the man of God and then say, I think it's Elisha, but he's like, yeah, I didn't call you because you always give me bad news, and I want a man of God that'll give me at least sometimes good news. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, from that guy's lived experience, that king, it's like, man, God is always against me. Mm-hmm. Now we understand he didn't obey God. He didn't, when the chips were down, he'd always choose something else, this kind of thing. But point in all this, though, is just recognizing the complexity, and this is so simple when I say it loud, but it feels very profound in my spirit, the complexity of knowing in my own life, okay, this is exactly of God, and this is not of God. And I do understand at times like this, legalism seems a bit attractive.
Oh, of course.
Because legalism says, no, if it doesn't happen exactly this way, then it's not of God, which by nature blocks out God, mm-hmm. who says, I do all things new.
Yes. No, and I love that, because it is very attractive, like your example of Oral Roberts. That's about as pretty close as you could come to definitively be like, no, I don't like.
Right.
Like, yeah. And if you were to say that right now, I would not be like, well, Jason, let's talk about this for the next hour. Let's work it out. I'd be like, yeah, it's probably right. But like you said, like going in that full distance, you can't think the way we think about the Bible and God, and logically get there. You have to shut off a piece in your mind to get to that space. That doesn't, again, like you said, doesn't change the way. That doesn't mean that we have to endorse everything. That doesn't mean we have to. That doesn't mean we're not discerning. That doesn't mean we're not warning. It doesn't mean. I think the problem is we either, like, if the second coming of Oral Roberts comes to Tulsa and starts, saying similar things, and there are people that in your orbit that are sucked in to that. Maybe it's all a part of God, of what God is doing, and we should be excited for them or join along or whatever. That's a possibility of something that could happen. It also is a possibility that we need to be people that are like, man, no, here, let's talk this through. Let's work it out. Let's really people who dive in to pushing against it. But here's where I think the battle comes in my own life. It's how I think about that other person, where it's like the actual ramifications and decisions I make, they matter, they're really important, and they could be directly against that person, even if they claim to be hearing from God. But how I view them can so quickly turn into, well, God wouldn't talk to them, where it's like the voice saying, well, God's not going to talk in that way, so easily becomes God's not talking to them. God would never say that, or God wouldn't do that, is so quickly in my mind, well, God wouldn't speak to them. And so, yeah, I think that's my battle, where it doesn't necessarily change your example of Oral Roberts. If that happens now and I've got to navigate that, my decisions could very much look like, the way I talk about it in my decisions could very much look like a complete renouncing of that person's actions. And yet it still matters in my heart how I'm viewing them and how I view them in God.
Right. And I think, I had a teacher early on that said people are so open-minded their brains fall out. And that was a call to be more closed-minded ultimately, or be more reasonable. They didn't make it. They were really advocating, I think, for closed-minded. Like, what I'm teaching is true. Everything else is going to be false.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the effort there and where I was at that phase of life. But it is one of those things that I would have been, as a Jew, I would have been so offended and judgmental of Jonah. There's no way I could have believed that our God would send grace to the Ninevites. There is no way, as Abraham's people, I would have accepted the circumcision message. I mean, I might have been forced to do it, but I wouldn't have thought, well, of course it's from God, Yeah. I mean, there's just so much that happens, and I put myself in the place of these Pharisees. They feel like, whether it's true or not, they feel like they're holding back the evil of the Roman Empire. They put in their time. They've studied a lot. And now this guy just shows up, and now guards who are supposed to work for them are siding with that. And maybe this is simply an indictment on me, but I want to be super careful not to become them. And then I wonder, man, I would trying to put myself in that spot. Somebody says, hey, this guy's going to die unless we raise this much money. I would say to them, be careful, which I think is reasonable. Pray to God. Ask God for you if it's right. Not judging him. Who cares? And if you ask my opinion, I will give it to you. But the key thing is God telling you to do this, or is this guy telling you God told him to do that?
And I think you can even go further where, like I've heard the don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. I've heard that all the time, and I think there's a piece of that is wisdom and is true, but it's also I think it's incredibly important to remind ourselves where, like, Jesus, I believe completely that Jesus is the only way, and yet I also believe God is a big enough God that he could speak to me through a Muslim, or through a Jew, or through an atheist, and so that doesn't mean that they're right in how they view the world, or that they've got it all figured out. Just in the same way that, like, I don't have a full, complete picture. I don't fully get God. I don't fully grasp who he is. But, like, if God is big enough to overcome my misunderstandings, to speak through me, and I think he is also big enough to speak through people who I completely disagree with on who Jesus is. And again, like, how you want to talk about whether it's salvation or what, like, that's a whole other conversation. But yet I know God is not in the business of throwing, how many Christians do they say there are now? 2 billion-ish in the world. If there's 8 billion people, God is not like, well, there's 6 billion, 3/4 of the people in the world I can't ever use. And, like, when you say it out loud, like, that's like ridiculous.
Yeah. And coming from the Bible, I mean, I'm always a little bit amused especially when I'm in a very conservative place that's like, yeah, that's absolutely right. 3/4 of the world God has no conversation with, never uses. They get a little rain, the unjust, but that's about it, And I'm like, and then it comes up Jesus' birth, and if they're telling the story, it's like, and these wise men arrive who are not of God. They're not monotheistic. They're most likely Zoroastrians or something like this. They're literally what we would call, ancestors of astrology, which most Christians would decry, out of hand. And so it's like, God can use anybody. And that's this point. And there's not, you don't have to make one or two choices. You don't have to say, God can use anybody, so I accept everything. That's not of God. but it's about your own discernment and valuing it.
That's good.
And not being quick to judge. And you're going to have to make a judgment. Like in this case, you're going to have to make a judgment whether you're going to send a check or not send a check. Okay. That's your primary thing. The more biblical, I think sometimes we get so caught up in the general. Well, is this true? I'm like, how does it affect you?
Yeah.
And politics is always this way. Cultural things are always this way. Like I've had people, it seems like everything, The Chosen, I haven't gotten this, but I remember when The Shack came out, I'd get people come out to me and say, what do you think about The Shack? And I'm like, why does that matter to you? How does it cause you to lean into God? What if it's terrible? What if it's good?
Yeah.
Make a decision for yourself and move on. I've just never understood this idea. I'm going to try to protect all humanity. And I'm like, bad things for a person sometimes positively influence other people. The thing I would get rid of today, maybe the thing that leads my, person closer to God. And I just have to be careful. And my safeguard is be teachable, be teachable, be teachable, which I think is still true. But if we're not willing to entertain God can do something totally unexpected to me, we're kind of not open to God.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's totally right. And ultimately what I come back to is like, okay, I've just got to cling to Jesus. All of this circles back around. It's not an open, like anybody gets to be my God and anybody gets to have equal say in my life. It's
absolutely right.
It's fundamentally, does this thing help me cling to Jesus more? Does it give me a better picture, a clear picture, or is it pulling me away? And ultimately, that's the helpful guiding practice. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating in pieces because like it's a lot easier. Well, here are the rules. Here are the 5 steps. Here are the spiritual rhythms that you have to do to fill out the equation to get where you want. And that can be. And I think there are times where having pieces of that are incredibly, incredibly helpful and healthy for you. But to not miss out on God, to see him in all the ways he's wanting to move, it has to be this nebulous, like it has to be this weirdly formed amorphous blob that you can't get your head around. Because if I could master it, then it wouldn't be of God.
Exactly.
Right. And ultimately I've seen how far my mastery can take me. And some areas it can take me far, some areas it can't. But when it comes to the thing that I want, which is just to be more like Jesus, I have to go beyond my mastery. And so, yeah, like that seems like a lot of extrapolation from this small interaction.
Yeah.
But I do think it's incredibly, informative for how we can view our life and how often it'd be so easy for us. There's so many examples in my mind where I'm thinking about times where I now with hindsight can go, I think God was speaking in that moment to me. And it just seemed weird and odd in the moment. And it seemed to buck against the grain, or that's not the way you say it. Well, however you'd phrase it. It went against the grain of how life usually happens. And with hindsight, I can look back and, I can see God doing that and I can see God moving. But also there are plenty of times where I shut myself off artificially. And so I believe we live in a God-saturated world and a Spirit-saturated world where there are opportunities every day for us to be the guards, to not have it figured out and mastered and be like, well, hey, what I love is the guards didn't come back and be like, okay, well, actually Jesus is the Messiah and he should be leading now. And let's logically, okay, Rome's not going to have it. They don't come back with like a plan to fix it all. They just come back with like, it's Jesus guy, something's different about him. And we couldn't do what you asked us to him. And so like, that's the encouragement for me that I have is Jesus' success. I think in this was not, it was not that they came back with a 5-step plan for how they're going to install Jesus as the king of a reunified, resurrected Israel. It is, we couldn't conform to the image of this world because Jesus was just so different.
Yeah. I love that so much.
I think we're going to end it there. I don't know if I necessarily got to perplex, but we're ending up our time, and I think that was just good. Grace, peace, and love.